Hello, and welcome to the 13th episode of the Nerdflix podcast. This week we have something very special because I have invented a time machine. And we are going to go back in time to January 31st, 2021. Why? Because that is the day of the first Nerdflix podcast. So let's get time traveling. Hello, and welcome to the very first podcast of Nerdflix. Here's how it works. Every broadcast, I talk about something new. Movies, video games, comic books, stuff like that. And I tell you all about it and give you some cool, fun facts. So, let's talk about today's topic, which is Spider-Man. What's up? Whoa. Who are you? I'm you, from a future podcast. Whoa. Wait, what's this future podcast on? Back to the Future. Nice! And now, I have to go back to the future. No, you already told me that. No, I mean I have to go now. Oh, okay, see ya. Okay guys, I'm back in the present, and why did we do that? Well, because today's episode is on Back to the Future. That's all three parts. Back to the Future Part 2, and Back to the Future Part 3. And we'll even talk a little bit about the animated series. So let's get started. Hey, it's time for Nerdflix! Welcome to the Nerdflix podcast. Okay, the first movie we'll talk about today is Back to the Future. This movie is great. I mean, I know I say this a lot, but seriously, this series of movies has to be the best movie of all time, best movies of all time. This has to be the best time travel trilogy as well. Bill and Ted is also equally good. I did that back in my third episode. I believe my third episode I mentioned that Back to the Future was the best. I do think Back to the Future is just a little bit better than Bill and Ted, but they're both pretty evenly matched. But these series of movies are really good. So this movie's basically about a teenager named Marty McFly living in Hill Valley, California. And he's just basically friends with this crazy scientist dude named Dr. Emmett Brown. He calls him Doc or Doc Brown. And this guy has made a time machine out of a car. Not just any car, a DeLorean. I had heard somewhere people making jokes about the fact that it was a DeLorean. Because, well, they had a point that the DeLorean barely made it off the assembly line. And so it's hardly fit to be a time machine. But as Doc Brown says, if you're going to time travel, why not do it in style? And the aluminum that it is made of is helpful to withstand time travel. Or so Doc Brown says. And well, this movie continues on to time travel back to 1955, where Marty meets his parents as, I guess, teenagers, and he messes a bunch of stuff up, and he has to fix all that so that he will exist in the future, and he meets the 1955 Doc Brown, and he has to, at the end, fix everything, and then find a way to get back to 1985, at that time was the present day, because that is when the movie came out. By that, he has to get a different version of the DeLorean put together so that he can use lightning power from lightning striking a clock tower to blast him back to 1985, and that is how Back to the Future ends. This movie was really good, and a lot of other people think that too. In fact, this movie is considered a classic film. But this movie was rejected over 40 times when looking for a production company, for a number of different reasons, but overall it was rejected 40 times before it found a production company and went on to be a classic film. I do think Back to the Future is somewhat of a clever name, because he does have to get back to the future, which isn't the future for him, it's the present. But in 1955, that is the future. But when this movie was being made, they didn't like the idea of having the word future in the title because that might make people think that it was a movie about time traveling to the future, whereas it's actually a movie about time traveling back to the past. So one of the ideas they were throwing around to replace Back to the Future was to call it Spaceman from Pluto. Now I get this is kind of referencing to Marty McFly's gimmick about being a spaceman, where he does that whole thing where he has to tell his dad something, but secretly when he's dressed in that hazmat suit and he pretends to be Darth Vader. But it really would not have fit the movie, so I'm glad they kept that clever name of Back to the Future. So part of the main plot of this movie is the fact that Marty McFly is good friends with Doc Brown. But some wonder how he was friends with Doc Brown, how he met him, how he became friends. And honestly, I thought about this too, because they just kind of start the movie like that, and they never really explain it. But in an interview with one of the production members, Bob Gale, he says he snuck into Doc's lab and was fascinated by all the cool stuff that was there. When Doc found him there, he was delighted to find that Marty thought he was cool and accepted him for what he was. Both of them were the black sheep in their respective environments. Doc gave Marty a part-time job to help with experiments, tend to the lab, tend to the dog, etc. Now this is a good explanation, and I think if you're a Back to the Future fan, or you're watching the movie, this is something you should know. This is a really cool piece of background information, and I'm so glad it's out there, and it is quite interesting because many fans have wondered about that and how they became friends. After the release of the movie, Bob Gale received a letter from John DeLorean himself, the creator of the DeLorean, actually thanking him for making a movie featuring a DeLorean. Because obviously the DeLorean did not do so well. It was only out for a couple of years, and then they stopped producing it. Well, John DeLorean was super grateful that his DeLorean was featured in a movie because it's great publicity for the car. I mentioned way back in the 3rd episode, Bill and Ted, about how the original idea for Bill and Ted's Time Machine was going to be a van instead of a phone booth. Well, they did not want to do the van because they thought it was too similar to Back to the Future's DeLorean, a current and popular time machine movie. And well, the original idea, instead of a DeLorean for Back to the Future, was actually a time chamber, which was almost like a refrigerator. It almost would have looked like a refrigerator, and it would have had similarities to Doctor Who's TARDIS and eventually Bill and Ted's phone booth. But originally it was going to be a time chamber instead of a time-traveling DeLorean. If you're a fan, you know Doc Brown's dog, Einstein. This dog is featured throughout the film and the entire series, but Einstein was originally going to be a chimp. Yes, a chimpanzee. Doc Brown's pet was originally going to be a chimpanzee, and I think they wanted to go for that because chimpanzees you see on TV used as test subjects for science experiments. So I think that's where they were going with that, but I like the dog idea better, though a chimpanzee would have been entertaining, but I think it was the right idea to have a dog instead. So now I am introducing a new segment I call Product Review. It's when we take the topic from the episode and we discuss different merchandise available for that topic. Since this week is Back to the Future, we'll be talking about the Back to the Future merchandise. I do own some stuff myself. I have a couple DeLoreans. I have all 3 of the different versions throughout the 3 movies, and I have one extra, one from the first movie. So I do have 4 DeLoreans, and I have 2 Funko Pops that are Back to the Future. I have Marty McFly, and I have a Doc Brown. Now, there are a lot of variants for those 2 characters in the Funko Pop world. So here on Amazon, you can get one with Doc Brown wearing his mind-reading invention from 1955 for the standard Funko price, around $11. You can get Doc from the 2015 outfit with the sunglasses and everything. It's pretty nice. A little bit more pricey. You can get 1955 Marty with the camera. You can get Marty from the future, the 2015 outfit. Except for, be warned with this one that his hat is not accurate to the film. It is silver instead of rainbow. You can get a different variant of Doc Brown. You can get Biff, and you can get all sorts of Marty variants. There was a really nice Marty McFly variant on Target that went up in November of him in the 2015 outfit, this time accurate to the film. But that one sold out in an instant and does not look like it will be coming back in stock. But you can, if you are willing to spend a couple more dollars, you can get, for about $30, you can get a Pop Town, which is the clock tower from Back to the Future, along with Doc Brown. So you have some pretty good options here, and they really do have some cool merchandise out for this franchise. The next movie we will talk about today is Back to the Future Part 2. This movie's pretty good as well. In this movie, they go to 2015. Of course, they wrongly predict how it turns out, which is kind of disappointing, but it's still a pretty good film, and I liked it a lot. This movie is about Marty traveling to 2015 this time, in the future instead of the past. Of course, like I said, they wrongly predicted how Back to the Future and 2015 was going to turn out, but it was still a pretty good film. Throughout, we see an older Biff, Hill Valley in the future, lots of future pop culture references. He goes into an antique shop, and in the window of the antique shop, you can see a VHS of Jaws that's probably worth, like, a lot of money in that movie. And he buys a sports almanac, so he can go back and he can place bets on the sporting events, so he knows, because he knows what's going to happen now. And then an older version of Biff gets his hands on the sports almanac, and when they try and travel back to their 1985, they get an alternate 1985 where Biff is basically in charge of everything. And it's not fun. But eventually they sort that all out, and that is basically the entire plot of the movie. They do have to go back to 1955, so they don't spend too much time in the future, maybe about half the movie, but then eventually they sort everything out. So, this movie has a lot in it, and especially when they go to the future. And though it did not predict exactly everything in the future, especially, flying cars and hoverboards, but it did get some things right. Now, there is a lot to go through and a lot of detail, and that could honestly make an entire podcast itself. And if you guys are interested in that, I suggest looking up stuff on YouTube or on the internet. I found a couple good YouTube videos on that subject. But here's some of the technology they predicted for 2015 that they actually got right. The use of drones, flat screen TVs, video chat, wearable technology, and paying for items with devices. Those are all things that they predicted correctly that will be in 2015. Since, like I've said multiple times already, they wrongly predicted 2015, when they released a special edition of the DVD in 2015 to go along with that. But on the DVD, and I found it on YouTube, that's where I've seen it, you go ahead, look it up on YouTube, it's a short with Doc explaining why 2015 didn't go the way it was supposed to. There's some kind of mess up with people bringing technology back, similar to the Sports Almanac incident in Part 2, and all sorts of fun little things going on. And then it ends with him zooming away in the DeLorean to go and try and fix those things and try and stop an apocalypse that's was going to happen if he didn't fix it in 2045. So, it was pretty good. And that short was very interesting, and if you're a fan of the series and you haven't seen that, I recommend looking it up. This movie introduces a super cool item, a classic item in the movie, and really throughout the entire Back to the Future franchise, that is the hoverboards. These things are awesome. I'd actually love to have one. And, they actually hover, and maybe about 6 feet off the ground, and they're pretty cool. I wish there were a thing, but we're about 6 years overdue for that, so... But anyways, they introduced these hoverboards, and on the one that Marty McFly has, you can clearly see the Mattel logo on it, because there's a lot of product placement and logo placement in this movie. So the hoverboards were sponsored by Mattel. Well, in an interview with Robert Zemeckis, the creator of Back to the Future, he jokes about hoverboards being real. Of course they're not, but he says that they were real for a couple years already, and that parents just didn't want them to be toys, so they kept them out of stores. Obviously, this is all a lie, and it was all one big joke from Robert Zemeckis. But people believed it. And since they were sponsored by Mattel, Mattel was getting all sorts of phone calls and letters, and all sorts of crazy people ringing, and, I want my hoverboard! Where's my hoverboard? Everyone wanted a hoverboard, but of course they weren't real. Like I just mentioned, there are a lot of product placements in this movie. Like a lot, all in 2015, and it's crazy. Anywhere they can put some kind of brand, everyone wants their product to be in the future, and in a movie that had such a big original film that they wanted to be in the sequel so that they could get noticed. Of course, that's what product placement is, but particularly for this movie, everyone really wanted it, including Pizza Hut. We know the Pizza Hut product placement from this movie, if you've seen the movie, is the pizza that Marty's parents bring over to their future house, and it's like this weird thing where they're like real tiny, and then you put it in this fancy piece of machinery, and it comes out as this big, juicy pizza, and it's actually pretty cool, but you can see in the packaging that it's obviously Pizza Hut, and they do mention Pizza Hut as that pizza. Well, Pizza Hut was really particular about how their pizza was being shown in this movie. In fact, they had like a food stylist come and make sure the pizza was perfect for every take. And they were so excited about this, they had a series of commercials around them that were Back to the Future Part 2 inspired, including some kids going on a joyride in the DeLorean and going around everywhere throughout time and asking where they can get a pizza, and a policeman points to Pizza Hut. So Pizza Hut was really excited about their cameo or product placement in this movie. One fun little fact to know about this movie that you can try and catch the next time you're watching it or rewatch this scene is that this movie marks the first movie appearance of Elijah Wood. If you don't know who that is the guy who plays Frodo in the Lord of the Rings series. Elijah Wood actually plays the kid in Cafe 80s by the Wild Gunman arcade game. He's the one who makes the remark to Marty McFly about the arcade game being a baby's toy because you have to use your hands. And this is a pretty cool fact to know about that movie. The next and final movie we'll talk about today is Back to the Future Part 3. This is a pretty good movie as well. I think they're all pretty good, but Back to the Future Part 3 did a really good job wrapping up the entire franchise. And it was a great way to end it. This movie is about them traveling back to 1885. And they do a whole Wild West thing throughout the movie. Marty McFly tells everyone his name is Clint Eastwood, which is a running gag throughout the movie. But overall, Marty and Doc have to find a way to get back to 1985. Similar to Back to the Future, but not as similar. Their final way to do it is to attach the DeLorean to the front of a train so they can get the DeLorean up to 88 miles per hour because it's out of gas. And throughout this, we have continuing conflict with this guy named Mad Dog Tannen, I guess a ancestor of Biff, and they have to fight him throughout the movie while trying to get back to 1985. This movie wraps up the franchise by having Marty get back to 1985, but not Doc. Then Marty ends up on the train tracks because that's where he left in 1885, and he jumps out of the DeLorean, and then the DeLorean immediately gets hit by a train and is destroyed. No more time machine, no more DeLorean. Or so we think, because then this big time machine train shows up that apparently Doc Brown built back in 1885. And now Doc Brown and his new family now are traveling throughout time in a big time-traveling train. And that's how the franchise in the movie ends. In this movie, the classic Hill Valley clock tower is just being built. This clock tower is a huge plot point throughout all the movies, but in 1885 it is just being built. Well, in a scene where Marty and Doc are questioning a train conductor about how fast a train can go so that they can plan to get the DeLorean up to 88 miles per hour, you can see what's being unloaded from the train is the clock that is going to be put on the clock tower. In this movie, there is a big party in the Wild West town, and Marty McFly is getting a piece of pie, and he sees that on the pie tin it says Frisbee. Marty McFly makes a remark about it being Frisbee, and of course nobody gets it because, well, Frisbees are pies back then and not the throwing flying disc we all know now. And then eventually later on in the movie he uses the Frisbee pie pan to knock a gun out of Mad Dog Tannen's hand. Well, actually, this was a true piece of history. Well, not the thing with Mad Dog Tannen, but like the Frisbee thing, was that Frisbee pies, the first Frisbee basically was created in 1871, but not the throwing Frisbee. This was a pie company. And it started when college students would throw around the Frisbee pie pans just like we throw a Frisbee today. And that's how they invented the Frisbee. So this is a cool piece of history we get to see in Back to the Future Part 3. In one scene, Doc and Marty have their picture taken in front of a clock that's about to be put on top of the clock tower, the same clock I talked about earlier being unloaded off the train. Well, we see this picture throughout the rest of the movie. They carry it around, and on the clock it is 8:08. And this could be a slight reference to the fact 8:08, 88 miles per hour. This could be a slight reference to the fact that they have to get the DeLorean to 88 miles per hour to time travel. Like I mentioned, how the movie ends is that the DeLorean gets destroyed by a train. It basically just gets hit by a train. Well, this actually happened. They actually put a DeLorean on train tracks and had a train hit it so it could be destroyed. But there was some concern about this because they didn't know if they thought the car would cause the train to derail once it hit it. But the train was so powerful and the conductor knew that it wouldn't. So when asked if he wanted to do it, he said, "Are you kidding me? I've been waiting to do this my entire life," and he was very excited to hit the DeLorean with the train. So there was a Back to the Future animated series. It only lasted about a year, from 1991 to 1992. I've watched a little bit of it on YouTube. It's pretty decent for an animated little kids show on Back to the Future. I think it's pretty okay. It's definitely not as good as the movies. And it's hardly even good at all. It's just average. If you do want to look it up, though, it is on YouTube. And it's available on DVD, so it's kind of widely available. Unlike the Bill and Ted series, which I talked about a while ago on my Bill and Ted episode, the live action one only lasted 7 episodes. So this one did a pretty good job. This one has animation, but also has commentary from a live action Doc Brown. He does experiments, like actual experiments where kids learn stuff from the experiments, similar to Bill Nye the Science Guy. In fact, one I've watched actually seems to feature Bill Nye the Science Guy in it. So that's a little strange for Back to the Future. But overall, it's decent, it's average, it's okay. Like I said, if you want to check it out, it's on YouTube. It's also available on DVD, and it's okay. Okay, that is it for this episode of the Nerdflix podcast. Join us next week when we cover our second TV series, Gravity Falls. and I will see you next week on Nerdflix.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.